Hello, this is the Musicians Weekly, Volume 21, and today I speak about the hype about so-called authentic performance practice. Because more and more musicians come across and tell me they don't dare anymore. I mean, even prominent conductors, they don't dare anymore to conduct Bach, to conduct Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, even Schubert. And they say that they feel not natural, and they don't feel it musical to do it in the style which is the style of today. But this style of today, which is pretentiously called authentic performance practice, what do we really know about it? First of all, most things are based on treatises of the time, on reflections, on like Quantz and Leopold Mozart and all these things, of course, Johann Mattheson, and which is very fun, very great, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. So there are many things, but we can, of course, we have to refer to Tartini, for example. And when we go to Tartini, it's very interesting. There is already vibrato. So Roger Norrington, who recently died, he insisted there was no vibrato even in Mahler's time. And so he would say that even to the last Mahler symphony, there is senza vibrato, everything, which is a total castration of the music. It is impotent string sound. And so if you always, and this is an argument always of authentic performance practitioners, if you always take the bad examples of the old practice, of the traditional practice, then you can always argue, we do something else, even if it's not better. It was too much of this, and so we do that. So normal electric vibrato, normal routine vibrato, which is simply too much. I have to say that this wonderful Guarneri quartet, which I really admire, there's too much vibrato in the Beethoven quartets, too much constant, in some way, routine vibrato, even if they play fantastic, and I really admire Arnold Steinhardt. But it's a problem. So if you have this normal vibrato, then you say, we do it without vibrato. This is much better. No, it's not better. It's lifeless. But of course, it is an opposition to something. So Nicolas Harnoncourt, he would start as a person in opposition to the decadent practice of doing Bach and Mozart and so on what at least he considered decadent by Herbert von Karajan and Karl Böhm. I'm not a fan of Böhm in Mozart, not at all. But many people think that this is the Mozart because it's from Vienna. And I am also not a fan of Karajan's Mozart, even if I have to say that I recently heard when he played a Mozart piano concerto, and this was extremely fine and refined. So we cannot just say the same about everything somebody has done. But so in opposition to this Philharmonic tradition, Harnoncourt would say, now we go back to the roots. But what are the roots? So Harnoncourt has written very good books about authentic performance practice. No question. Klangrede is a very interesting book. But then we cannot ask him anymore what he thought about that. We have two different concepts. We have cantability. That means everything is singing. And we have rhetorics, so-called Klangrede. Everything is speaking. So what is the basic thing? If you ask Georg Philipp Telemann, singing is the fundament of all things in music. And he would not be the only one. First of all, you have to be a singer, and it has to be cantabile. And then you can also have some kind of rhetorical things. But basically, it's cantabile. And now we have the problem that if you don't have a real idea about the building up tension of intervals, if you don't have an objective level of understanding melodic energy and also harmonic direction, then you will be lost with the cantability also. Because then you can only go to some cliches of, bel canto. And bel canto is beautiful, and we have a lot of wonderful examples from Italian opera. But of course, it's just a thing of a time. And bel canto is in Verdi and in Puccini and Verismo and all these things. It's very beautiful. But normally it is not counterpoint music, or not very much counterpoint at least. And so this tradition of bel canto will not be the whole idea of cantabile. But you can have from singers always ideas of cantabile, particularly from singers from the time some 70, 80 years ago. Was some of those fantastic singers like Dusolina Giannini. Incredible singers, many at the time. Today singing is also more in a kind of rhetorical manner now. So it's very refined. There are lots of details, as we have also in chamber music. When you listen to string quartets now playing Beethoven or Mendelssohn or Schumann, a lot of detail and a lot of overphrasing in the detail. And I am absolutely an admirer of not putting the emphasis just on the one of the bar. If somebody is not in this primitive manner and understands that melody can emancipate itself from the meter. And this is very important that we understand that. But the so-called authentic performance practice goes extremely with the one and with the heavy beats in the bar. So the one and also the three in the cross and all these things. So then it's a very primitive idea, because it's like marching. Yeah, for military use, it's okay, but also you would say it's very primitive way of making military music. So it makes no sense if there's a melody. And if the melody is not with the accents of the bar. So when I listen to Nicolas Arnoncourt's St. Matthew Passion and I hear the introductory choir, and it is such an emphasis on each one of the bar, which totally breaks the flow always. So this is totally against counterpoint, this is totally against melody. And when I hear people like Reinhard Goebel with The Art of the Fugue, it is no discussion. This is totally wrong idea about this music. Because this music, like Art of the Fugue, it comes from Fiori Musicali, Frescobaldi. This comes from the so-called Renaissance polyphony. So it comes directly from Josquin de Bray and from Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina and Thomas Luis Vittoria. And then this is this tradition of counterpoint, of flowing counterpoint, and of elevating music. So it is music totally beyond any kind of effect. It is just angelic music. It is just heavenly music. And of course, in the Art of the Fugue, there are several pieces that are more instrumental. And then, of course, it's not so much cantabile. So we have these things. As we have in the ball-tempered piano, we have some very cantabile fugues and we have some very instrumental fugues. So in the instrumental pieces, you should still have cantabile, but of course in another way. And then we go again to some other ideas of so-called authentic performance practice today. First of all, we have to know that it was always local tradition everywhere. So if you have some treatises and they point out how things are done, you have first to think, if somebody today would write about how music is made today, this person would write about the things which are not the usual, the basic ground, because the basic ground is like the air we breathe. We don't talk about it. We don't write about it. It's just the common sense. And the common sense we never have to insist on. It's just there. But people will then write about the things that are spectacular and that catch them and that are specific, and all these things will be described. I think it was not another thing at the time, normally. And then, of course, we have always to consider that there is an incredible difference of local traditions. So it was totally different if you were in Hamburg or in Berlin or in Dresden or in Chemnitz or in Leipzig and so on. And so it depended on who was there, from where, and what kind of strong personality this was, and how in Germany the styles were mixed up, and how they were understood, and so on. And things were crisscross everywhere. So you could not know, but there were strong local traditions. Most musicians were always from the place where they were born, at the place or almost there where they later played. And of course, some of the leaders, they came from Italy, they came from different places, and they took their positions there, and they brought new influences and all these things. But it was different from place to place and also from period to period. And so we don't know very much about most of these things. And the way to describe how music is performed is very different. Sometimes it is, of course, as it is now with the so-called authentic performance practice, I'm sure that some people, in opposition to something which was overdone, they would insist on some opposing way of doing it. And so when Leopold Mozart writes that the notes are always a bit shorter, there has to be air between the notes, that's a thing that maybe he had the experience that some people were playing everything a bit even overlapping in the ensemble. And Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart would call this Klebericht, like it's you cannot separate it. So then if you have to fight this with these phenomena that it's always a bit nebulous, then you want more clarity. But the next one will maybe come and say, all these things are too separated and we have to integrate it more again. So it depends just on what you experienced and what you thought that was done too much of it or to consider too less and so on. And always in this dialogue, things happen. And if you take these things in an isolated manner and take them as a kind of absolute truth, you will probably most of the time go wrong. And now we have a few things that I think that are totally wrong in most of these performances in so-called authentic style. The first thing is that almost all the notes that are not legato are played short and very short. So there is something like playing half of the length that is written. It's a kind of compromise that we say, okay, we played a bit shorter. But this is, of course, this is better than playing everything very short, but it depends totally on the situation. In many situations, particularly when you have a note becoming dissonant because the other note is going against it after it started, you have to take it whole length until it's resolved. But this is not done in many cases. So I hear many recordings of concerti grossi by Handel or by Corelli or Brandenburg concertos and all these things where it's totally hopeless to even to think about this because they have totally forgotten. It's what I call hypothetical dissonance, hypothetical solution, hypothetical counterpoint. It doesn't really work. But we get used to it and it gets normal. But it's wrong. And with playing everything very short, like in the Beethoven, when this is dam, bam, bram, bam, and this is nonsense. And same in the Second Symphony and so on. Yeah. So in the beginning of the Second Symphony. And there are countless examples. And this is totally wrong. And the first consequence of this is that it becomes fast. and everything becomes fast. That's the second thing, that we almost have no slow movements at all. And even we have some people who think that there were no slow movements because this is boring, and because at the time everything was moving fast. But if I think, for example, about the French overture of Lully, when the king comes in and it's the majestic gravity, and when you play dim, ba-da-dam, ba-da-da-da-da, di-di-do, di-di-do, or you play jam, ba-da-dam, di-di-do. This is total nonsense. This is not a king coming in. This is a boy doing some sports and coming in and trying to just impress a few young ladies and so on. This is not majesty. And we have lots of examples for these things. Even if with Mozart, we have the first movement of the D minor concerto, which is today, the D minor piano concerto. The first movement today is always played much too fast and too short in the details. What most people don't know is that Mozart, in his catalogue of works, he remembered this first movement as an allegro maestoso. But in the score, there is only allegro. So you cannot be so sure. And what means allegro? People today in so-called authentic performance practice normally think allegro is presto and presto is prestissimo. And so everything is fast. Largo is andante, adagio is andante, and andante is allegretto, allegretto is allegro, and so on. So this is a total confusion. And of course, there are more confusions. There is the idea of having every longer note swelling and then coming back. So a kind of like this, a belly on every longer note. But there are many long notes that are almost just constant sound, which makes sense. And this is all, it comes from choral singing in a cappella music, in medieval music and in Renaissance music, where these kind of only making effects on the line because it could be boring. It's not boring if you do it in a real transcendent manner, that you understand how the melody moves and what kind of tension is inside the melody. Of course, if you have no idea about melody and harmony and their development and their relations of tension and solution and harmonic direction, then it's very boring, and then you have to get an idea about how to make effects. So you really have to understand melody and harmony again. And I will give a lot of coaching and explanations about these things, because these things today, most people don't know anymore about them. And there are two reasons. One reason is that contemporary music in atonality has lost any contact with harmonic tension and with melodic energy, natural energy, melodic tension. So interval, hearing the character of the interval, all these things go lost in atonality because, it's even the idea that this does not exist. There is no root note and all these things. And the second thing is in so-called authentic performance practice. It's also ignored and it doesn't exist. So it's only heavy 1 in the bar and maybe heavy 3 in the bar and all these things. Fast, short. And so we have to get out of this prison again, and we have to get new ideas. And there are a lot of good new ideas and fantastic impulses. But at the moment, almost all the critics, believe that even they write reviews, and first of all they write it's done in the correct style, or it's not done in the correct style, or it is not really correct, and so on. This is the only idea they have anymore normally. Is it correct or is it not correct? But I would ask, is it creative? Is it unique? Is it in accordance with the character of the music? And that means, which is totally lost, it's a nivellation to the conventions of the time, the imagined conventions of the time. That is what normally happens. And so there is almost no difference anymore if you play a piece by Bach or you play a piece by Erlebach. And this cannot be true. Even there are some people who think there is no difference in quality. But we have to go back to understand melody and harmony and to really study it. We have to find sources, and we will maybe not find them in Baroque music. We will maybe not find them in classical music. We will maybe have to look in a later time. But this did not change, because the idea, not the idea, the reality of melodic tension and of harmonic tension and of the energy of the line and all these studies of Schenker and Kurt and so on, this is not nonsense. This is timeless. And we have to study this much more seriously again, and to find a new approach to the music before the time when it was possible to record music. And we have to understand that treatises are only a kind of partial help. Although I can go to the metronome idea. Yeah, metronome. This is total nonsense. When you speak about the Beethoven metronome markings that are incredibly fast, we know that 50 years after Beethoven's death, there were documents that show that at that time, even half a century after Beethoven died, metronomes were in a totally individual speed, all of them. So metronomes, the same could mean 60 or 70 even. Such differences were normal. And many composers withdrew even their metronome markings because they understood that it doesn't work. So Beethoven had he could not control that anymore. He was almost deaf, and so it was too late. But these metronome markings, you cannot take them seriously. And there are more things about the so-called authentic performance practice. Basically, it's a wonderful thing. Particularly the original instruments, the original sound is something, and also the original pitch, the original A, which was maybe not 440, maybe it was 425 or something like that. And this changes a lot. I heard Herwege with Beethoven's Ninth, and it was at least a half tone lower, and the choir was much more beautiful. The soloists were more beautiful. It was not this screaming in the high register. It was fantastic. It should be done always like that, if possible. So there are lots of bliss in these discoveries we made, but there are also lots of errors, and we have to redefine the whole thing step by step. And I'm working with musicians a lot on these things. Particularly interesting at the time now to work in Generalbass with the bass phrasing, which, when you do it in the right way, and almost nobody does, changes the whole character of the piece in a dramatic way and makes everything so lively you cannot imagine, because it is not accompaniment. It's much more. But anyhow, I hope you find this interesting, and of course, I'm very happy if you reflect about these things, and if you have some serious ideas and some subtle arguments about how it can be done and about what can be changed. Wishing you all the best. See you next time in a week.